Hey, good morning, world. It's Patrick Lovell coming at you on January 31st, 2023 at 9:47 a.m. my time. And yesterday, um, as every day, there's a lot to interpret in terms of how things work themselves out and what presents itself that's in continuity to the revelations that I continue to bring to you. That is like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear, does it matter? Considering the absolute enormity of what it is that I'm reviewing to you, I've got to believe that at some point, somehow, some way, this is going to trigger and it's going to start a massive wildfire that people suddenly get it and realize that I have the answers that have taken years and years and years and millions of dollars to aggregate, that I was suppressed, I was censored, I was oppressed basically from telling the truth, and that all of media and government is in on it. And every power structure that exists in this country to prevent you from knowing the truth. And what's the truth? Well, the truth is that we have a fictional economy. We have a Ponzi scheme ridden, Wall Street financialized crime syndicate that works on a global scale that is playing roulette with you and me and has perverted and inverted every actual contextualization of what it means to be the United States of America, from the integrity of law to separation of powers and accountability to the powerful. And it's mostly because of ignorance and laziness and being overwhelmed, meaning the people, the regular people, especially victims. And the victims are the most perplexing to me because they're the ones who should be the most outraged, the most out in front of this, the most committed to what it is that we reveal in the con, because what it does is it legitimizes their suffering, their fight, their journey, but yet they're all caught up in their own granular story and asking somebody to help them, to somebody to send them a life raft, right, and to pull them out of the water and save them while the Titanic is sinking. Meanwhile, what I'm trying to do is prevent the Titanic from hitting the iceberg to begin with, and I need millions of you to understand what we've already learned to prevent what's coming next. But yet, we haven't been able to break through because people would rather talk in circles about Marjorie Taylor Greene or Biden, whatever manner of Bidenisms. And it's always so much he said, she said, look here, look there. And it reminds me of this cartoon that I remember seeing when I was a kid of Bugs Bunny, where he was pointing in every single direction to confuse everybody knowing what actually is going on. And that's what we are 24/7, 365 days a week. And somehow, some way, this has got to resonate. And it has to become something that you carry as your own battle, that you reach out to 10, 20, 30, 100 people and break through, because we've got the information. First and foremost, you can go to The Con, www.thecon.tv. If you click on videos and you have, I believe we have 30 microdocs where you can show people exactly different elements of how this whole thing works. You might not do it in continuity, but you can use those materials to help foster, what it is that you're trying to convey, if by a chance you want to end corruption as bad as I do. Same thing we have a phenomenal podcast that you can find on, really just any Google search. If you just type in Real Progressives, the New Untouchables. All of this information is testimony from experts and victims and high-level whistleblowers and so forth that reveal the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended, that's multiple trillions of times bigger than Watergate, for example, or Contragate, or whatever. But I'll tell you, the continuity between 9/11, two global wars, 2008, whatever is the underlying financialization under the COVID scenarios, and then what we're in the midst of now, which is, I think, the everything bubble about to pop. The markets were in turmoil yesterday. I think they're rebounding as I record this. But I'm going to try to keep this just to 2 points this morning that I think really paint the picture clearly of everything that I've just told you and then some. So about a year ago, I remember watching on a Sunday afternoon an NFL football game where this infomercial was playing on another channel. I was channel surfing and I happened to see this infomercial starring none other than Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, a Republican who created kind of the new Republican Party, if you want to know the truth. And he's been a K Street lobbyist and influential for, the last 2 decades. And he was the face, maybe even an investor. I'm not sure exactly what the backdoor relationship is. Maybe he was just a gun for hire, but he was a spokesperson for an insurance, if you will, to prevent people from getting their houses stolen based on documentation fraud that works its way through the registry of deeds and courts, which is what I've been trying to convey to you, the details, but he does it through this operation called Title Lock. And in Title Lock, they feature, for example, victims of documentation fabrication that put these people in the crosshairs of having their houses stolen from them, even though they've never been late or they own their house. Houses can literally be stolen through documentation fraud through a variety of sort of schemes, one of which happens in the registry of deeds, another happens in the banks, and it can unwind in the courts as well. But what Newt Gingrich, a guy in his position, is doing is he's validating with a spokesperson from the FBI and others, as well as criminals that actually conduct this racket, who say exactly how they do it. And then what they're doing is they're selling Title Lock. Now, the difference between what Newt Gingrich is doing and what I'm doing, and what was interesting, because yesterday I posted this video of one of the criminals basically testifying to how he stole 150 houses and the methodology that he did using it. And somebody who's very vocal on Twitter out of the Northwest, whose house is actually in the crosshairs of that right now, was like, holy shit. And his first reaction was, why is this criminal telling everybody how he does it? As opposed to thinking about the structure of what's involved. Okay, first and foremost, what this Title Lock scenario creates a portrait of is that, yes, indeed, and it legitimizes through the FBI, that documentation fraud is done, can be done, and how it's done in the registry of deeds and also in the courts to steal people's houses. And their remedy for that is to sell you a service that actually you can get from most of your registry of deeds for free, from what I understand. But at the same time, maybe it does provide a valuable service to a degree. But the way the producers formulate this and frame it is that it's usually white people that are elderly, that are targets of this, that they're preying on their fears to get them to pay a fee for this Title Lock, which is kind of like the security. But I ask you to consider this. What is Newt not telling us? Well, Newt is trying to dramatize that it's just criminals. And in our story, and what I've learned from the best in the business of criminologists that put thousands of executives in prison for white-collar fraud, have taught us that the whole time it's going after the mice while the lions roam the campsite. And what that means is, yeah, there's a lot of hucksters, there's a lot of criminals that find this stuff and they do terrible, terrible things, and every once in a while they get busted. Every once in a while. But they are not the banks. They're not the too big to fail institutions that can hire foreclosure mills, which are law firms, on behalf of servicers that hire foreclosure mills, that, when a home gets into foreclosure, typically by the servicer putting it into foreclosure through a bunch of methodologies and schemes itself, that they will doctor documentation fabrication to create a collateral file to show to the judge that they have standing to foreclose. And the judge doesn't allow discovery to enable you to understand, or it depends if they're a plaintiff and suing the servicer, or if they're a defense in a foreclosure, where they are desperately attempting to show that the foreclosing party does not have standing on the lien title to be able to take the house, because they're not the ones owed the debt. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's fucking insane. Well, it is insane, because we securitized all of these bundles of mortgage-backed securities through all the assortment of what we call liar's loans that were documentation fabrication to get loans approved, because the brokers and the appraisers and the lenders and the credit rating agencies and everybody involved with the pipeline were incentivized to approve loans, even though they knew there were loans that were going to go south, because they created all shape or form of these liar's loans through different techniques that could get people to focus on a short amount of time paying for a low rate that they could afford, and then they would have a balloon rate, an adjustable rate, or they'd have negative amortization, any number of schemes that would definitely change the terms of what was owed and when and how, which would, in the past, force people to refinance, because they used to say a rolling loan knows no loss. And why would a bank continue to do that? Well, because there were pensions and municipalities, and there was a global appetite to buy mortgage-backed securities. Countries through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, our government-sponsored entities, the governments of China, and would buy these in the tune of billions, right? These securities, because it's rubber stamped with the full faith and credit of the United States. That's why we say there's a hybrid government guarantee with the government-sponsored entities that were created after the aftermath of the Great Depression, to be able to create a catch-all so that banks could actually not get jammed up having too many loans on their books that they couldn't continue to lend to stimulate the housing market and growth. So the GSEs would buy all of those loans, put it on their books, and then ultimately sell them as bonds. That's what we've been doing for decades, and it's all based on stopgaps and underwriting standards, which are foolproof if you do the work. But if you are able to, because what we show you in the con, through control fraud, through modern executive compensation, to where it fosters this ideology of I'll be gone, you'll be gone on Wall Street, where people are selling, toxic assets because they get paid fees and they get paid bonuses to do it, which is illegal reps and warranties, which could take the whole firm down through deceptive acts and practices, which are laws on the books going back to the Great Depression, because we understood this stuff after the Great Depression. But what we've ended up doing was we ended up getting rid of the regulation, which is cops on the beat for the financial sector, starting in the late 90s through the smoke and mirrors policy, through the likes of getting rid of Glass-Steagall, through Gramm-Leach-Bliley and the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, so on and so forth. That created this lunacy, casino capitalism, which is based on predatory capitalism. All you have to think of is you're walking into a casino where everybody at the tables and the machines and everything is fixed against you. Now, we all know that's kind of the case anyway. The odds are stacked in favor of the house. But this is different. This is actually, you're targeted. They're going to sit you down. They're going to freaking give you the cards that are bullshit. Everybody at the table is in on it, and everybody's there to sucker you. I mean, that's the situation writ large, because the house is getting paid insane fees to do this. And then what we ultimately find out is the house is the full faith and credit of the United States through the Federal Reserve, as I've indicated to you over and over in these what the fuck files. But in this particular case, again, I want you to consider former Speaker of the House, K Street lobbyist, a guest frequently on Fox television, everything else. He's selling, and they're buying time on local television stations throughout the United States, and they've done this for over a year, where they're telling you about this insane fraud, but they're focusing it on bad actors, like criminals, like somebody who would steal your purse. Yeah, they're out there. That's true. Identity theft, all those types of low-level players. What they're not telling you, and what Newt Gingrich is either so incredibly stupid, which I don't believe, or he's in on it, is hiding the fact that the banks themselves, the primary dealer brokers, the too big to fail apparatuses, everybody in this country in the financial space, whether it's asset managers or hedge funds or private equity, and then the too big to fail apparatus, because of this collateralization and commoditization and this ultimate securitization through the collaterals that I just mentioned and the derivatives flow and everything else, that they're selling shit to blow up. That's what they did before the 2008 great financial crisis. And when the whole house of cards fell, that we gave literally backdoored, that nobody understands, while the press, the media of this country bought hook, line, and sinker, or were complicit and got messages behind the scenes to do this, to say, look, the whole system's going to go down unless you play ball with this, which it appears to be the case, where, the New York Times doesn't tell the full story. They told different pieces of the story, and there was like there were so many people that got in the game that tell different stories, but nobody was telling the story, which is the full complex story. All you got to do, for example, is if you go back and you watch Inside Job, which is free on YouTube right now, and you see what director, screenwriter, producer, investigative journalist, and quite frankly, genius Charles Ferguson was able to accomplish in 2011, but what he came away with, and then ultimately get to the con and know that everything in between was the government basically, shucked and dived everything with the media's complicity to make sure you don't understand what it is I'm telling you. And now it lands in 2022, 23 with this guy, Newt Gingrich, who is a well-known guy selling fear porn to elderly white people, that this is actually happening and they've got to protect their most treasured asset, which they do, but at the same time, while not telling you everything that's created this and everybody who's involved with it. I mean, it's Orwellian and dystopian and ridiculous that, that television stations around the country will air these infomercials because they're being paid to, and then they'll run concurrent stories with, and I've seen this, with reporters that are saying as a lead-in to the block, for example, oh my God, there's this new crime underway that you can have your house stolen. So they tell these stories in Seattle and San Francisco and San Diego and Detroit and everything else. And then they have this infomercial that they buy a block of time on. But meanwhile, wait a second, where's the government? You mean to tell me there's this massive crime syndicate that can steal your house? Oh yeah. Oh, but maybe they're covering for the financial system that owns the government. Because again, if you understand the economic play of the United States, you understand that we sell bonds and securities around the world to finance the debt of the United States, which is now $31 trillion. That's made up of all of our consumption. Whether we're buying cars on debt, whether we're buying houses on debt, whatever the case is, it's all locked and loaded in this situation. And if you get rid of the underwriting standards, you have a real calamity on your hands. Why would they get rid of the underwriting standards? 4 decades ago, we created neoliberalism where we shopped out the golden goose. So we didn't have a consumption society based on people going to jobs that have livable wages to be able to sustain this. We shopped it out all around the world so the middlemen could make a shit ton of money on the fees. We could produce cheap products to come to the United States, and then we could get our energy overseas, and then ultimately everything's a facade and our consumerism and our strength. It's shallow how or whatever. I mean, it's an empty vessel. You have to have sustainability. You have to have and you got to put this into perspective. We have enormous resources. We have enormous capacity. We could create a country where if you had the underwriting and the integrity of law, then everything functions and it's a dynamic structure and it's a rising tide raises all ships rather than a rising tide that raises a few yachts, for example. Now, what about the law? Now, the other side of this is that, there's this insane revelation happening that I'm not hearing anywhere in mainstream, but I'm just watching in pockets because I'm doing a deep dive on trying to understand all things crypto and especially FTX and the Alameda and Sam Bankman-Fried, because my partner and I and team are involved with putting that together. And, it's just extraordinary to me that some of this information I'm about to lay on you is, I think, really the other side of what I just told you. So there's a law firm that's been around for over a century. Maybe it's like, I don't know when Sullivan and Cromwell started, but it's like one of the most powerful white shoe law firms and really the law firm to Wall Street. I've mentioned to you the biggest whodunit in revelation in history is an interview that takes place with a guy by the name of Roger Cohen on the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission in 2011, where he expresses and explains, as the general partner and the leader of Sullivan and Cromwell, how the consortium of the banks, the too big to fail banks that he's representing, were dead in the water of the crimes that they created. But they had to widen the scope of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to be able to usher in emergency liquidity as the lender of last resort to buoy the sinking, drowning financial system. So all of you that are in debt, that are up to your eyeballs on shit that you couldn't manage and that you're letting it hang on your job, and then suddenly you get your job nixed and you're up to debt at the wazoo, are you going to dig into your bank and then be able to get trillions of dollars to loan to yourself? No, you can't do that. But the banks can. And they were all insanely bankrupt because of this insane fraud that I'm revealing to you, of which, of course, Newt Gingrich gives you this, and I'm giving you that. It's insane, and nobody understands who I am. This is absolutely insane. And so Sullivan and Cromwell, this incredibly powerful law firm, is up to its eyeballs in conflicts of interest in crypto, okay? And crypto exchanges and Bitcoin. They're like involved with all the major players, not just FTX. But as it plays out, I think their general counsel or a former, so this is how it worked in the revolving door. A former employee of like 3 years, maybe more than that, at Sullivan and Cromwell ends up becoming general counsel at FTX. And general counsel being the top attorney at FTX, who's supposed to be involved with making sure all the shit that happened at FTX didn't. And one of the attorneys that FTX had hired was this guy named Friedman. Friedman was a guy that was guilty or found out that he was involved with like online poker, and he was hired to basically hide that they had this god eye, that they were cheating their customers, and they got busted, and that's that guy, and he ends up at FTX working for Sam Bankman-Fried. So does this guy from Sullivan and Cromwell. Sullivan and Cromwell, with his like 900 attorneys, they represent all these different crypto exchanges and all of these different Bitcoins that are also part and parcel to what FTX was funding by backdooring, as the way John Ray, the guy who's now the guy who was hired by Sullivan and Cromwell, who did the bankruptcy for Enron, was, now the guy leading the CEO of FTX now in bankruptcy because there's $9 billion missing. But apparently this guy who was working at Sullivan and Cromwell that ended up going to FTX was able to create a $200 million slush fund to pay for Sullivan and Cromwell's, work on this, where they're charging for like their partners like $3,000 an hour. I think they've already pocketed somewhere in the $9 million range for their services, and there's money to be made in bankruptcy. But they were there before, as this whole thing blew up, and then they're there to clean this thing up, and they're connected to all of these, cryptocurrencies. And the fact is, the very bare basics of corporate governance were not followed. And you got to ask yourself, given what I just told you about Sullivan and Cromwell's involvement with the financial sector and Wall Street, and what we discovered in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, is concurrently involved with all of this manner of companies that are operating fraudulently. And what do we mean fraudulently? Once again, it's criminal theft by deception. There were investors that provided FTX money because of the exchange and all of the different things they were investing in, not to have Sam Bankman-Fried backdoor through a channel that he created, the algos with, his tech guys, to be able to personally get billions of dollars to do all the stuff that he was doing, from, buying off politicians on both sides of the aisle, whatever he was doing internationally, buying off media, and everything else that came with it. And, if you followed the story, some of this stuff. If you're just hearing it for the first time, yeah, this is how it works. And the most powerful, white shoe law firm in the United States, most likely the most powerful, given what I just told you about them representing Wall Street, because Wall Street owns the show, they're also involved with this bullshit with crypto. Because if you look at crypto and Bitcoin with the long lens, given a lot of speculation, throughout this last run that led to the likes of, Matt Damon bringing it back to Inside Job, becoming the global spokesperson of crypto, is like, you got to be kidding me, because it looks like it's just a way to, illegally, launder money all over the place for a lot of dark sources. In fact, this other company, whose name eludes me at the moment, and I've mentioned the last several what the fucks, this guy from Russia just got nailed by the Department of Justice for a $700 million, money laundering situation. And boy, was it complicated what the DOJ deftly maneuvered to be able to blow this thing up. And it just shows how capable our institutions are when they're doing their job in the right direction. But meanwhile, all of this stuff is happening. Okay? I could give you more details, and you could check off more boxes of who did what, when, and how. But what I'm telling you is it's the machinations of the power of the financial system, the legal system, that have absolute control, especially when you consider that they're backdoored up to the Federal Reserve that provides, endless amounts of funding for this because of the nature of what the dollar is, and the the magnitude of being the world's reserve currency and the way it's been built over 4 decades. Man, we're either coming to an end one way or the other. I mean, I think the end was 2008, to be honest with you. And I think nothing's really changed since then. It's only gotten worse. I think it's gotten weird in 2019. I know all sorts of things about repo backdoor with Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to the tune of $22 trillion because of run and repo markets that had to fucking backstop SoftBank out of Japan, which has got some strange corollaries. And then all the way through COVID, but and I'll finish with this just in terms of your thought process, right? So I'm working with the premier investigation, platform into financial crimes in the entire planet. The New York Times is like the USA Today now. They're second rate. They're a part of the problem. the guys that I'm working with are AAA at investigations, and I happened to come across a video based on some of their work that they were involved with, and it was out of Australia, where they were using the work of this platform that I'm involved with, to look at money laundering and tax shelters and offshoring and outsourcing as it related to Australia. In the kind of the consortium of the story and the leverage of the story to the Australian people was, look, they're extracting wealth from our nation. They're stealing our land. They're stealing our resources. They're stealing our value. They're offshoring it to places like Samoa that are involved, like, Cayman Islands or South Dakota or, other tax havens and everything else. And they exemplify that, look, what we're dealing with is all of this dark money and the dark, underworld of crime that finds its way through these offshoring scenarios, where they extract, taxes from other countries. They hide it in these offshore companies, and then these guys purchase stuff that then destroys the sort of equilibrium or the actual markets in those places. Like, it just hyper increases the real estate. It hyper increases the food costs, and then the regular people that are a part of those countries can't afford it because their jobs aren't to launder money and steal money and park at places and to pay off counties and attorneys and politicians. This is a global thing, man. And it's been going on for far too long. It's been going on since the 70s. It's gotten hyper freaking, it's been going on longer than the 70s, but this kind of stuff is like, it's next level. The technology, the complicity, the attorneys, the white shoe law firms, those that can get involved with murky and shady organizations and literally still maintain their credibility and have one foot in the government, to be able to control it, and one foot in the dark places, right? And then if you're like somebody like as swarmy as Newt Gingrich, then you exploit those who have no idea what's going on. They prey on ignorance. They prey on your apathy. They prey on your buying into the system. And, I was one of those guys, and I got blown up, and I started asking questions 13 years ago, and I pulled all of the threads, and I got the whole fucking picture. It's not that I'm just, theorizing this stuff. I went to the top people at the FBI, DOJ, SEC. I found the only RICO conviction in the entire country predicated on everything I'm telling you in the housing collapse. And the housing collapse is by far the biggest fraud ever. Now, when we talk about energy, when we talk about money laundering, when we talk about, a lot of you want to respond to sex trafficking, yeah, that's part of it. But ultimately, the real estate in the United States was by far beyond comprehension, Godzilla-like, from another planet, larger than what it is I'm telling you. Again, just know the numbers. Right now, there's a $9 billion hole in FTX's balance sheet. That's huge. There was $600 trillion in derivatives trades that blew up in 2006 as this house of cards fell. There's 1,000 billion in a trillion. We've probably spent, I know we spent 30 trillion in 2009. I think that we're up to 55, 60, 70 trillion possibly. And that's just what we can observe that have gone from the Federal Reserve through monetary policy, through quantitative easing and all of these other scenarios into the financial sector. And then we're all talking about the debt, among other things. This whole thing fuels the debt. And then in some ways buys it back for the rich. And they continue to play roulette with your lives. You're in the casino at the roulette table. They've got the gun pointed at your head and you're playing and you don't even realize what's at stake. You're on the menu, man. You're the mark. You're the target. You're the sucker. You're the gameplay. You're the squeeze, man. How many of you know what it is that I'm talking about? If we just took like a statistical analysis based on what we can see in terms of the debt, I'd say a vast, vast, vast majority of the United States. And that doesn't even count like the people that went through this back in 2008 that really lasted throughout the whole time period because it never ended. We're talking millions, tens of millions of people that need to have their sunglasses pulled off. They need to see what this is. It reminds me of John Carpenter's They Live. Anyway, I could go on and on. I hope that's enough for today. Onwards and upwards. Please join us. Please check out all of our material at www.thecon.tv. Please like and subscribe to Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, the What the Fuck Files. And please share. Please get on board. And if you can, and if you've seen this incredible thing, I'm leading a movement to try to purge this corruption. we've got to get your buy-in. We've got to get resources to be able to get vertical, to be able to get organized, to be able to push back. Why do you think billionaires spend so much money on politics? Because it pays to freaking set you up. What I'm looking for is a $13 contribution, in honor of the 13 original colonies that came together to create the United States to thwart tyranny. It's the whole point. It's the whole point of history. If you go back from, Moses in Exodus, quite frankly, Jesus at the temple throwing out the money changers. When you go into whatever, religious historical sort of narrative, these stories are everywhere. It's always been tyranny. I'm about liberty. The system's already been created. It just needs to be tweaked to deal with the modern challenges. That's all. And you got to have smart people that know how to do this. And I'll close with this, man. I mean, it's like, people, I need you to configure this in your mind. We're the United States of America, the country that overcame tyranny, slavery, ultimately fascism, Jim Crow, and then we get into, in order to form a more perfect union based on all of these lessons throughout history, this is the next phase. We created NASA. Our capacity is unlimited. Our ability to defeat evil is incredible. There's more good people in our country than bad people. They just don't understand the system. They have to get motivated to understand that what I'm doing is to redeem those that have fallen by the wayside because they got set up, and then trying to protect the rest of you that are about to feel the same pain. It's just stupid. There's no way in hell it's 2023 is what I continue to remind myself of, but it is. Let's get together. Let's join hands. Let's forge forward. Let's rise above. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. Onwards and upwards.